Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on damp and mould, which is the first topic-based online event of the 4 Million Homes programme. This programme is funded by the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, and is being delivered by the Confederation of Co-operative Housing and PPCR. I am Blaise Lambert, the Chief Executive Officer of the Confederation of Co-operative Housing, and I will be hosting this event and speaking about the types of damp. Our other speakers are Leslie Channon, Public Affairs and Tenant Engagement Officer at Taro, Luke Spanton, Head of Standards in Rented Homes at the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, and William Longhill, Head of Social Housing Regulation at the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities. Today's session will examine the different types of damp and their causes, outline the need to report problems, how to report them, and what to do if your landlord does not deal with your report properly, and explain what landlords should do to prevent and tackle damp and mould. We will have time for questions after each speaker, and at the end of the session, an opportunity for you to make comments about the subject of damp and mould, and to tell us about what your landlords have done to address such problems. So we'll start off by looking at the types of damp. I will briefly be discussing the four main causes of damp and mould in homes: incident-related water ingress, penetrating damp, rising damp, and condensation. So firstly, to start off with, incident-related water ingress. Water ingress is when water makes its way into a building and is usually bad news. Incident-related ingress will cause damage based upon the amount of water that is entering. So a roof with one missing tile would cause minor damage that would build up over time and would be noticed particularly during heavy and sustained periods of rain. Whereas a roof with a missing section of tiles would cause more significant damage, and a roof with its entire roof removed during a heavy storm, substantial damage. The causes of incident-related water ingress include, as I've just mentioned, damage to roofs, missing or broken tiles or slates on pitch roofs, but also blocked flat roof rainwater stacks. These are the pipes that take water down from flat roofs and stop flat roofs from turning into swimming pools, and faulty flashing around chimneys. Blocked or faulty guttering, defects relating to walls, cracked render or damaged mortar, bridging to cavity walls or damaged damp-proof coursing, and damaged or broken pipework. Problems with windows, primarily faulty flashing around window frames. Flooding from outside water buildup or internal burst pipework. And faulty plumbing from properties above or from leaks within your home. All of these can cause water to come into your property. And clearly the more water that is entering, the more urgent the need to stop it. But all water entering into properties will cause damage over time if unchecked. Secondly, penetrating damp. Penetrating damp can cause a variety of problems in your home, and there are a number of potential causes. To avoid penetrating damp leading to potential costly damage and to health problems for residents, it is important to get it sorted out as soon as the problem is noticed. Penetrating damp is when water infiltrates a building's structure. Some of the signs that your home may have penetrating damp include mould on walls and ceilings, damp patches, a musty smell in the property or in parts of the property, paint and/or plaster that is peeling and coming away from the walls, it being difficult to heat your property and to keep it warm, walls feeling very, very cold to touch, woodworm presence in the property. Woodworm very much likes to attack wood that has been exposed to damp, and dry and/or wet rot. The causes of penetrating damp include minor leaks in pipework or plumbing around the building, badly maintained, broken, or full and dirty guttering around the property, damaged mortar, missing or faulty damp-proof coursing, faulty or aged window flashing, blocked air bricks, missing or inadequate waterproofing in the wall cavity, and wall and brickwork damage caused by age or frost damage, amongst other things. Penetrating damp through walls is relatively common, as bricks can be prone to water penetration, and most of our homes in one form or another are constructed with bricks. Driving rain can lead to water being absorbed by bricks and eventual penetration. Problems can also be caused by incorrectly installed cavity wall ties or corrosion of metal ties and building faults, including serious structural issues. Remedial works such as cladding, insulation and re-rendering can also make matters worse if they are badly carried out. Third area, rising damp. Rising damp is often cited as a problem in buildings, although in truth, it is a relatively rare form of damp, certainly compared to penetrating damp or water ingress. This form of damp affects the walls of buildings. It occurs when moisture from the ground travels up through walls by capillary action. This means that groundwater is effectively being sucked up through the building through tiny tubes that form in the brickwork. Groundwater often contains salts that also travel up with the water. These salts are deposited on the wall when the water evaporates. There are two main types of salts: sulfates, which result in crusty white patches being formed on the walls, and invisible hygroscopic salts known as nitrates and chlorides. The hygroscopic salts continue to draw moisture and therefore should be treated, whereas the sulfates don't continue to draw moisture up, but have been drawn up by the water in the first place. Rising damp is usually first apparent by the damage it causes to internal walls. Plaster and paint can deteriorate, and wallpaper tends to loosen. A visible stain or tide mark often appears on the wall at the point where the groundwater has risen up to. You may also see salts appearing on the internal wall structure. Externally, mortar may crumble and white salt stains may appear on the walls. Most buildings have some form of barrier at low level to prevent water rising. This is called a damp-proof course, or DPC. These are made of non-absorbent, water-resistant materials such as slate, bitumen, and plastic. The DPC can remain intact but can be breached. This is where water is able to travel past the DPC because a construction fault, such as debris in wall cavities or subfloor voids, internal or external renders or plasters overlapping the damp-proof course, external ground levels rising above the damp-proof course. You can sometimes see external soil or grass that's above the outside level of the damp-proof course. Well, that water, rises through the soil or the grass, and it's above the damp-proof course. Solid floors and intersecting structures and abutting garden walls can also cause bridging of damp-proof courses. Rising damp is often confused with damp caused by condensation, and this is a common cause of misdiagnosis in many cases. The Code of Practice for the Investigation and Control of Dampness in Buildings states that one of the most reliable ways that may be used to differentiate between dampness due to condensation and that due to rising damp is to compare moisture in the contents of samples of masonry, or preferably mortar, from within the depth of the wall and near the inner surface of the wall. Samples from within the wall will not be damp if surface condensation is the only cause. Fourthly, condensation itself. Condensation is the most common and easiest damp problem to fix and often does not require professional help, whereas the other three areas that I've covered most certainly do require the input of professionals and works to put them right. Condensation is caused when humid air meets cold surfaces like walls and windows. As the temperature falls, the amount of moisture that the air can hold falls, and tiny drops of water form on the surface. The air in all of our homes is naturally moist, but the amount of moisture is increased by the release of water vapor from cooking, bathing, showering, and even breathing. If condensation is allowed to sit on walls for long periods of time, it can penetrate the outer layers of your walls. And this is the point I was making about rising damp, is that rising damp penetrates the inner core of the wall, not just the outside surface, and seep into clothing and furniture where it becomes a longer term problem, causing mould to grow. This mould can also be detrimental to health. Better ventilation helps reduce condensation problems, but will not completely remove them. Options for ventilation include opening windows when you're at home, installing air bricks that are made with small holes into outside walls, installing air vents through internal walls or sealed chimneys to allow airflow through the house, fitting roof ventilation tiles and or ventilated soffits under the roof and guttering to allow air through the roof, and adding window vents to the top of window frames. In addition to ventilation, removal of moisture from your home will also help. Therefore, your bathrooms and kitchens are responsible for most of the moisture in your home. Therefore, encouraging landlords to fit extractor fans in these rooms should be suggested if they're not already present. And in the kitchen, extractor hoods which send air outside of the property through ducting are generally most effective at removing steam and moisture. If these are not effective, then dehumidifiers are good for drawing moisture out of the air. However, extractor fans and extractor hoods, again, are not always sufficient to ensure properties have proper airflow. For more serious condensation problems, there are bigger systems available that can improve ventilation, such as positive input ventilation systems, which control and filter the air that is drawn into the building to replace the humid air that is removed by extractor fans. Sudden changes in air temperature can exacerbate a condensation problem, as water evaporates and condenses each time your central heating switches on or off. You may find that having your heating on a constant low heat helps, but this can be a costly option, particularly at the time given this current time given utility prices. Finally, always try to limit the amount of condensation produced in your home. Try to dry clothes outside rather than on radiators on sunny days. If you don't have an extractor fan, open windows when cooking, washing up and showering, and remove condensation that does appear with sponges and towels. And I hope that's given an initial oversight of the four main types of damp, their causes, and the ways in which you can spot which types of damp your property is suffering from. I will take any questions and comments that anybody might have about this opening section of the webinar. I'll just pick up on one of the comments from Zara. You're absolutely right that understanding the causes is one thing. Getting a landlord to fix it is something completely different. But we wanted to start the session by outlining what the issues were in the first place. Given that there don't seem to be any other questions or comments at this stage, I'm going to move on then and introduce our second speaker, Leslie Shannon, who is going to be speaking about some of the well, how do you report it to your landlord, and what do you do if, or what should they do, and what do you do if they don't? So moving the subject forward from that initial point of introducing the types of mould to the and damp to the what do we do next? So Leslie is a long-term resident at Cotsway Housing Association. She is the Public Affairs and Tenant Engagement Officer at Taro, the National Social Housing resident body. As an engaged tenant and campaigner, she was a lead steering group member of the Benefit to Society campaign and chair of the A Voice for Tenants steering group. She's become one of the leading tenant voices in the country to make the case for better engagement. Working closely with ministers and department officials, she helped to develop and co-facilitate the post-Grenfell ministerial roadshows, which informed the Social Housing Green Paper. She's also led the successful annual Housing Day social media campaign. Leslie will be speaking to you about how problems should be reported and what to do if your landlord does not respond appropriately. So Leslie, over to you.
I'm going to be speaking today about what tenants need to do. So part of the tenant's responsibility is to actually contact their landlord if they are experiencing damp and mold, and you know, they have a role in bringing cases to a landlord's attention, which I know a lot of people have been doing, and it's been falling on well, that's lifestyle, just been kind of given lifestyle guidance. Now, the landlord does have a legal responsibility, and obviously since AWOB's death, there has been this huge highlight on damp and mold and how it can affect people. And, you know, the Ombudsman has come out and said it is not lifestyle. A lot of this is to do with structural issues like Blaise was discussing earlier. Now, I'm just going to read something out first, because I thought this was a really, really powerful statement. It's about the shocking death of AWOB that we've all heard of. A 2-year-old boy died of a cardiac arrest after exposure to toxic fungal mold in a dangerous flat in Rochdale, England. The coroner said AWOB Ishak died as a result of severe respiratory condition caused due to prolonged exposure to mold in his home environment. His parents had raised the issue with Rochdale Borough Homes on frequent occasions and had been ignored, with AWOB's father being told to paint over the mold. NHS staff also raised the case with RBH, although they too hadn't taken certain actions that may have helped. The role of claim solicitors in blocking RBH's access to the property may also have been an issue. There was no evidence that the family were anyway at fault. A coroner's report was highly critical of the housing association and the case had a huge media profile. Now, the chief executive has been replaced and a new chair has been appointed. For me, it shouldn't have to take the death of a child for this to be looked at. And I think that the kind of default that has happened is that it's lifestyle. And no one has actually come out to look at the property. Now, for me, that kind of dismissive attitude, there were so many people in this case that heard the complaints, that took the calls, the NHS staff, the solicitors, the housing association, everybody kind of knew that there was an issue and they did nothing. So obviously there's now AWOB's law that has been put into the social housing regulation bill, which will strengthen tenants' rights. And the Ombudsman has really put out the landlord's responsibility. Now, I was doing a lot of research for this, kind of going on to organizations' web pages who are best practice organizations. And I think the first port of call when you are wanting to report something is to go on to your organization's website. I know not everybody has access to a website. You go to the website, actually, for about 18 months ago, I would say going on to organization's website, it was quite difficult to find where you could make a complaint, where you could actually speak to someone. I didn't see anything on damp and mold. Now, kind of going on to specific websites, damp and mold is quite high profile, and also the complaints policy. I went on to Cotsway's website. I also went on to some other websites yesterday, and it was easier to see. Now, a complaints process is that you would first of all go onto the website, see what I would read the policies and see what the policies say. But the complaints normally is that you would call your social housing landlord and report the issue of damp and mold. And then you would say you would actually make it, that should be a stage 1 complaint, right? That, you know, that you are putting in a repair. Then it should then go, they should actually investigate. And then if you are unhappy with that, you can take it to a stage 2. They should actually print it out, really simple. There is one organization has put it really clearly on one piece of paper. It's really easy. So it just kind of it starts with a service request, and then if you're unhappy, you take it to stage 1, and then if you're unhappy with the outcome of that, you should take it to stage 2, and then if you're unhappy with that, you can go to the Ombudsman service. Now, the language around all of complaints has changed. I remember when I made a complaint to my housing association, and when the kind of formal letter that comes out saying this is the outcome of this complaint, blah blah, if you're unhappy you can take it to the Ombudsman, but the wording was very legalese and kind of put in a way that would dissuade anyone from taking it further to the Ombudsman. It was, I thought, worded to kind of shut you down. So you just kind of went, okay, well, I don't really want to take it any further. That language has now really changed. They've also removed the designated person that was put in. So, and you can actually, it says you are able to contact the Housing Ombudsman Service during your complaint should you feel it's not being managed appropriately. So the wording of complaints processes are actually becoming very clear. And this is one of the things that the Ombudsman has said, that it needs to be very clear how the complaints process is actually works in practicality. I was at a housing association doing some work about something other than this a little while ago. And I was running a lot of focus groups with tenants groups and tenants in general. And a lot of them still were a bit scared to actually make a complaint or raise a complaint, or didn't know how to make a complaint, or didn't know how to access the complaints process. Or I know that landlords previously have, if they, unless you physically say, I want to make a complaint, would just not log it as a complaint. And I think that the whole culture around complaint handling needs to change, that every single time a tenant picks up the phone and has a conversation, it should be a learning. Complaint should be an area of learning and not something that you don't want to deal with. So with that, the other thing, there is quite a lot of I mean, I don't know how many people use TikTok or have access to TikTok, but I was on a TikTok course yesterday, and now there was actually very useful short videos with how you can manage damp and mold and condensation within your property. And it was just for you to be able to take, you know, sometimes during, you know, the winter, I get condensation on my windows. I have, you know, a newish build property, but I just go, you know, and wipe the windowsills because of the condensation and kind of open it up. But I know that obviously, like Blaze has said, that there are other issues that are structural. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is that there's a whole move of having devices put in people's homes, and while that to kind of monitor, you know, water, you know, in the air, and there's been a report done at the University of York about looking at smart homes and how that and the potential for remote stuff and sensors indoor quality to manage homes and social housing. Taro Trust are going to be doing a webinar July 5th, and the author, Dr. Alice Wallace, will be talking about that research. I know that from the panels and stuff that I've been speaking on with regards to that, I think there is some concern that having tech in the home kind of replaces the eyes of actually the landlord. And I think that there is an argument for actually having it in the home so that if it gets triggered, you know, someone could come out. But I think that actually having, you know, someone come out to look at it as opposed to them just dismissing it as a lifestyle or just giving you the fob off, I think is actually really important. So the other thing is that damp and mold prior to the last 18 months was not really seen as a big issue, even though it might be a big issue to people under the building safety, and now it's considered one of the big 7. So it's like goes with fire safety, gas service, electrical, asbestos, Legionella, lifts and stuff like that, as well as the damp and mold has now been added. Does anyone actually have any questions for me and Blaze at this point?
My name's Andy Merther. I'm with East Midlands Homes. I'm over in Leicester. I answered that survey from about 4 years ago. So obviously after what we're talking about, I'm hoping things in EMH have improved. I'd like to make a comment that that survey was quite high. But I think one of the reasons that many of us are here is because we've had problems.
Yeah.
And so it's probably weighted towards being high. Whereas if you put that into the general population, it probably wouldn't be quite as high. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Andy. And here's hoping, as you say, that this time round of people being asked questions that they've probably been asked for years, somebody will actually listen and do something about it. I think that's the key thing. And again, why, you know, we see this program as being about being a catalyst for change, because change is needed rather than people just endlessly being asked, have you got a problem? Well, yes, and then what? But I certainly recognise that. Leslie, you want to come in?
Yep. Yeah, so I've just got some high level stats here. So the Regulator of Social Housing report kind of highlights extent of damp and mold problem in England. It says under 2% of social homes have the most serious damp and mold problems. And this is out of the 4 million. 1 to 2% have serious damp and mold problems. 3 to 4% have notable damp and mold. This means 6%, this is an estimation, 6% of the 4 million homes, so that's 240,000 homes. It's quite a big number, even though, involve problems with damp and mold. And it said that this is not a minor issue, but however, they also go on to say that the picture is incomplete, so problems could be more extensive because people are just not either reporting it or just kind of living with it, and that the landlords have obligations for fitness for human habitation and the housing health and safety rating system. But things are changing, and the ombudsman have made 26 recommendations from their report, and a self-assessment tool for boards as well. And I know that the DLUC are going to be talking after me, but there's 10 key factors to influence success of any action plan, and you need to take in they actually need to visit homes and listen to tenants. I mean, that's what they said, and this kind of links with the work that Taro is doing with our emotionally informed practice as well as links with the Respect for All charter that we are developing at the moment. And it's a big whole culture change and culture shift that the regulator's been talking about. Also that, you know, everyone, it should be everybody's job and responsibility that works within the social housing sector, that when they are interacting with a tenant, or they hear a complaint, or that it's on them as well as an individual, that it can't just be, well, it's not my job, or it's not under my job description. It should be under everybody's job description, that they need to listen to the tenant voice in their duties of their job. But that's kind of enough, I think, for me. Is there anyone else that, there's
well, I
someone
do
else.
have some more questions, Leslie, so just bear
Right.
with us. So firstly, I saw John from Barnsley's hand up at one stage. You're muted at the moment, John.
Yeah, thank you, Blaise.
That's all right.
It's a comment, really. We're lucky, or perhaps more fortunate in Barnsley than most. Our council grasped the issue 18 months ago, as soon as it was made national, and they have driven, along with Barnsley Homes, a sea change in the organisation regarding damp and mould. Tenants have been involved. They've set up a new policy. They've set up new web pages and guidance for tenants. If anybody wants to visit Barnsley Homes website, it's all there. Type into the search engine damp and mould. It will bring up that page, and right at the very bottom of it is the damp and mould policy. I would encourage anybody to have a look at the policy, see what their organisations are doing, and anything that it could encourage their conversations that they're having. I am so disappointed in the fact that nationally, organisations are extremely reluctant in some cases to deal with the issue. And I'm really afraid that the regulator may take a big stick in the not too distant future. I do hope they will, actually. Thank you, Blaise.
Well, thank you very much for that, John. And that's very much the sort of story that we're keen to hear about, what landlords are actually doing to improve things and how they're actually listening to residents. And certainly that's a very good story. And, you know, one of the things we're very keen to do with this programme is to make sure that residents around the country have access to that good information, so they can challenge their landlords that are not coming up to the standards that we all want, by demonstrating, look what they're doing in Barnsley. Why can't we do this? So thank you very much for that. That's a really good story. And we'll most probably be coming back to you to hear more about that at a subsequent stage. So thank you.
Sorry, Blaise, I have sent Jane a copy of the policy. If Jane wants to electronically send that to every participant, that's absolutely fine and wonderful.
I've put the link in the chat, actually, John.
And as I say, we'll be promoting it, you know, further than just this webinar as well. That's very much one of the things we're keen to do in the programme, is promote, you know, as broadly as we can across the 4 million plus households, what is actually being done that makes a difference out there. You know, we've all got, you know, a lot of stories about how bad things can be, but it is those good news stories that are going to start to make a difference, because people will, you know, be able to see what good looks like and demand that change from their landlords that are not coming up to scratch. I'm going to come to Peter Allington next, please.
Hello there, Peter Allington. I'm a customer with Greatwell Homes. I was one of the people that answered positively to that short survey. I made it wasn't a complaint. I had a problem with damp, whereby the soil was piled up above the damp course outside my property, and I had ingress around the lower part of the window wall. I made the housing association aware of this problem. They responded within 5 days. A gentleman came out, an assessor, looked at the problem, identified the problem. Within a further 10 days, operatives came out, rectified the problem. So within the space of, within a month, the problem had been rectified. So all I can do is congratulate Great Well Homes on that. Also, their Great Well Homes complaint procedure, I would say, second to none. It's excellent in my experience. I mean, I don't know what other customers have experienced, but I can only speak firsthand. Okay, thank you.
Again, thank you for that, Peter. Again, that's an example of, firstly, you're talking about an example of the sort of bridging issue that I talked about earlier, where the soil's piled up above the damp-proof course, and essentially, you know, the water's just getting in because it's above the course. But again, a really good story there of how a landlord should respond, you know, in timely manner, in a manner that is about, let us get down there and find the problem and fix it. And actually so many problems relating to either penetration or rising damp, you know, have a really simple issue at the root cause, like the one that you've talked about. And yet again, you know, as Leslie was referring to, too often in the past, landlords have chosen to just point to lifestyle choice and seek to say, it must be something you're doing in the property yourself, rather than actually coming out, taking a look at the building and going, oh, look, we've got soil there that's 6 inches above the damp-proof course. That will be the problem. So again, thank you very much for that. That's another really good example that we'll look to highlight as we move forward through the programme. I just wanted to very quickly note what Jackie had put in the chat, and yes, as I touched on earlier in some of the causes, issues relating to windows can quite often be a driver of ingress and penetration as well. Faulty flashing round windows, rotten window frames, badly fitted windows, double glazed units where the seals around.
I'm being told it because I don't open my window. Now I've got a wall window.
Oh, right.
I've got a wall window. So it's virtually the whole of one wall is a window, and all it's got is two little tiny flat windows at the top. Okay. I have shrunk a lot because of bank problems. I can't reach the windows to open them. And even if I manage to, I can't then close them. And there's nothing the other side of me. So when the wind comes, and I live up on a hill in West Yorkshire, so I can assure you the wind comes quite frequently, the wind just comes soaring through there. I had heavy curtains up to try and stop the wind, completely rotted with mould at the bottom of the curtains. And all I got told was, open your windows more.
Well, surely your landlord could and should be doing more than it is doing, and certainly that's not a great story. I'm going to move on now to take our speakers from the department. We will have a sort of final section after the department speakers have spoken for any final questions and comments. So if you've got any further questions or comments that you'd like to make, can I ask you to just hold them for the time being? So we have two speakers from the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities who will speak about what is required of social landlords. So what does government expect landlords to be doing? Luke Spanton is the Head of Standards in Rented Homes, and William Longhill, the Head of Social Housing Regulation. So over to yourselves.
So the bit I'm going to cover is what the current regulatory framework looks like, what the current standards are. Now, all rented properties, including social rented properties, must be free from dangerously hazardous conditions. They must meet the Decent Home Standard, and they must be fit for human habitation. So what does that mean? Well, the first thing is to be free from dangerously hazardous conditions. That's under the Housing Act 2004. Part 1 of the Housing Act 2004, and local councils actually have the power to take action here. Now, the exception there will be where it's a council house, because local councils can't take action against themselves. But all other forms of social housing, housing associations, etc., local councils have a duty to take formal enforcement action if they identify dangerous hazards at the Category 1 level. Now, damp and mould is one of the hazards they assess, and they assess this using something called the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, or the HHSRS. Now, we're reviewing that system. We want to make sure it works as well as possible, and we're going to be publishing some results of our review soon. As I said, damp mould is an HHSRS hazard. So the local council, if a tenant is concerned about levels of damp mould in their property, they can contact the council. The exception, as I say, is council tenants, who William will talk a bit later on about what they can do. There's also the Homes Fitness for Human Habitation Act. So landlords must ensure their property is fit for human habitation. The tenants can actually take their own action through the courts for that. The courts can require that the landlord remedies the issue, and the courts can actually require that the landlord pays compensation as well. And again, this includes damp and mouldy conditions. It's a bit different from the Housing Act 2004 because the judge and the court will decide. They won't have to do a risk assessment or anything like that. They'll decide based on the evidence, so what the tenant tells them, photographs, etc., whether they think the property is not fit for human habitation. And then we have the Decent Home Standard. Now, this is the standard that social housing must meet. The Decent Home Standard says that a property has to be free from those serious hazards I mentioned earlier, free from the Category 1 most dangerous hazards. It also says that a property must meet minimum standards around things like thermal comfort, that the property must not be in disrepair, and that the property has to have reasonable facilities, things like kitchens and bathrooms. It was designed to encourage social landlords to engage with more sort of life cycle maintenance, we call it, program maintenance. So not just reacting to problems, but actually making sure their properties are well maintained. There's some other regulation. It doesn't necessarily cover damp and mould, but I thought it was worth to mention it here, that your landlord has to provide you with a gas safety certificate once a year, and that landlord most recently has to install smoke and carbon monoxide alarms. As I say, not necessarily about damp and mould, but really worth knowing about. Now, we've actually made lots of commitments about this recently in 3 different government white papers. So in the social housing white paper, we said we were going to review the Decent Home Standard. You know, it's nearly 20 years old. It's time to review it. So we got a sounding board of experts, which included tenants, landlords, other representatives of the sector, and we worked through the first stage of that, and we concluded that while the standard is broadly fit for purpose, it does require updating in certain respects. And then last year, the Levelling Up white paper said that we were going to halve the number of properties that don't meet the Decent Home Standard by 2030, and that includes privately rented properties. Even though the Decent Home Standard doesn't actually apply to the private rented sector, that commitment was to halve the number of rented properties totally that don't meet the Decent Home Standard by 2030. What the Levelling Up white paper also did was said we're going to explore how we actually look at the private rented sector as well as the social rented sector. I know we're talking about social housing here, but we're very interested in private housing. The private rented sector is larger than the social rented sector now, and there are disparities across the two. So the second part of our Decent Home Standard review, which we're going to start again this year, is going to consider how best to reduce the number of non-decent properties across both private and social sector. And then we had a private rented sector white paper last year as well, which said we will actually introduce the Decent Home Standard in the private rented sector to ensure we've got parity between the tenures, so that no matter what kind of rented house you live in, you can expect the same standards and the same conditions. So what are we saying we're going to do? Well, when it comes to damp and mould, the appalling tragic death of Awar Bishak last year, the coroner's response to his death last year, the coroner made some recommendations, and our Secretary of State and the Secretary of State for Department of Health and Social Care agreed with those recommendations. And one of those recommendations was around the Decent Home Standard and around the inadequacies of the standard dealing with damp and mould. So one of the things we're going to explore is a mandatory minimum standard for damp and mould. So saying not just that landlords have to do a risk assessment and make sure there's not dangerously hazardous conditions, but actually say no, there's a point at which there's a standard around mould and damp in your properties. I've heard people talking about the way landlords can blame tenants and can use language like it's lifestyle or whatever. And our Secretary of State's been very clear that he thinks that's unacceptable. So we are going to make sure the standard takes that into account, and also the comprehensive guidance for everyone else takes that into account. We're also looking at minimum energy efficiency. There are already minimum energy efficiency standards in the private rented sector. Now, socially rented homes tend to be more energy efficient than privately rented homes because they tend to be newer buildings. But we're going to ensure that the Decent Home Standard considers how this standard can work to support better energy efficiency. And we have committed to a minimum energy efficiency standard social homes. And then again, I know this isn't to do with damp and mould, but I love the opportunity to talk about everything we're doing. Introduce regulations requiring 5-yearly inspections and testings of the electrics in rented properties. So that sort of brings to the end of my bit, which is about the standards that properties must meet to the regulations that are there and what we propose to do. I'm going to hand over to William now, who's going to talk about the next steps here, how tenants would actually make sure these standards are met.
Hi everyone. Yes, so Luke was talking about the sort of standards you have to meet. What happens if, of course, your landlord doesn't meet those standards? And we were hearing earlier about the complaints process, but if you don't get what you need through your landlord's complaints process, then the Housing Ombudsman is there to help you out. So it was set up by law to look at complaints about housing associations that registered with them. The service is free, independent and impartial, and it works with the residents, the landlord, which in the most most instances is a social landlord, but there are a small number of voluntary private landlords as well. And the ombudsman sort of role is to decide whether that a registered provider has been responsible for maladministration while carrying out its functions. And maladministration means effectively not following the various its own procedures or the various bits of regulation and law that Luke was talking about. If it finds that the landlord hasn't behaved properly, it can tell the landlord to take steps to put things right, or to provide compensation to the resident, and it can do that at unlimited amounts. It's free to use for social housing residents, but as well as adjudicating on the landlord's handling of complaints, it also has a role in generally improving the quality of complaints handling throughout the system. So I'll sort of talk more about the kinds of work it does there, but it's very much a kind of standard setter in terms of what good complaints handling looks like, and it produces its own complaints handling code, which landlords have to follow, and also goes on to conduct investigations into issues that go beyond an individual complaint. So where it sees lots of complaints about a particular landlord or a particular issue, it may conduct special investigations. It was recently published special investigations into Clarion and other landlords where there's been what looks like I suppose systematic evidence of poor complaints handling around a particular issue. And it also looks at whether are particular issues that are common across the sector. So for example, on issues like damp and mould, it does special investigations where it tries to understand what's going wrong in the way that landlords are handling complaints on this issue, and what should they do to handle things better. So just in a practical step, what actually happens and how do you complain to the Ombudsman? As we've heard earlier, the first step is to report the problem to your landlord. Of course, that doesn't always have the outcomes that you're hoping for, but that is an important first step. All landlords are meant to have complaints processes that should be easy to use, fair and designed to put things right. But if you think your complaint is not being dealt with correctly, if you have a delayed response or no response, the Ombudsman is there to advise. The second step is to escalate the complaint to your Ombudsman. It will deal with each complaint in a number of different ways, and once they receive a complaint, there are a few different outcomes. So it may refer the case to a different organisation if the issue is one they can't make a decision about, or because it's not in their jurisdiction. For example, there are some instances where they may recommend that legal action is the right course to take. They may, depending on where you are at stage in the complaints process, attempt to mediate, work with you and your landlord to resolve the dispute. Using their experience of resolving complaints to make suggestions to the landlord or the resident if they think there is a way that the two can come together. Or, and this is what happens in thousands of complaints a year, they'll carry out an investigation where they decide an investigation is proportionate to the circumstances and there's evidence of effectively potential landlord wrongdoing. So if that complaint works through and there is investigation, there are a number of different things that could happen. So it potentially could find that there hasn't been any service failure. It could find the landlord has done maladministration. So this could be, and this is at various levels, which they call maladministration, severe maladministration. These depend on the circumstances, how badly the landlord has failed, and the impact on the resident. Or it could find there's evidence of failure, but the landlord has identified and acknowledged this and has been through its own sort of resolution process, so made the appropriate steps to put that right and offer compensation. The Ombudsman publishes all of its findings on the internet, so it's really worth having a quick look at their website to see what some of these cases look like and see the sort of depth and quality of the kind of investigation that they do, as well as the kinds of things they do when they publish the judgments against landlords, including not only the levels of compensation that they order landlords to pay, but the recommendations they make to landlords to improve their service for people, across their whole organization. It's not just about putting things right for one individual resident. The Housing Ombudsman is, I suppose, increasingly visible. I mean, I hope that some of you have seen some of the adverts and awareness campaigns that we've had on online, on the radio recently, and I think the Housing Ombudsman himself, Rick Blakeway, has been on TV and lots of other sort of in the media a lot, trying to raise awareness of the role of the Ombudsman and the importance of people using it, and that's generated loads more demand for it. And so as part of that, and as part of the broader push that the department is doing on improving regulation and I suppose just access to justice for residents, there are quite a few things we've been doing to try and get people a better experience with the Ombudsman and make sure it's as effective as possible. Firstly, we want to make it faster to access. So we've removed what was called democratic filter, which meant that previously people had to wait a certain period of time after their complaint to complain to the Ombudsman or to go through their MP. We've removed that so people can go immediately to the Ombudsman for help. We've also allowed the Ombudsman to get a lot more funding, which comes from landlords themselves, to make sure they can manage the increased number of people who want their services. As I said, we're trying to increase awareness of the Ombudsman, not just through sort of government communication campaigns. We spent £2 million earlier this year on comms, but also more public naming and shaming of landlords who the Ombudsman finds to have behaved badly. So the Secretary of State's been writing to landlords, but also making it very public when he's done so, to try and I suppose really sort of make it clear that it's not acceptable to treat residents in the way that in the way that they do in some of the cases the Ombudsman has found. Finally, we're also giving the Ombudsman more teeth. So the social housing regulation bill that is in the process of going through at the moment will give the Ombudsman more power to I suppose set standards in complaint handling. It's going to give them the power to issue their complaints handling code on a statutory basis, and make sure that all landlords will have to self-assess against that every year. And what that means is if someone complains to the Ombudsman, they can look at the landlord's own assessment of how they're doing in having a sort of functioning complaint system. And if they're not living up to the quality of complaints handling that we would expect, that's more evidence that something is going wrong and potentially more evidence of systematic failing, and they can then refer that to the regulator of social housing. They're also being given the power to issue best practice reports that they can ask landlords to assess against. So for example, on issues like damp and mould, they can issue a report that says, here are 10, 20 things that all landlords should be doing. And if a landlord, and if they receive a complaint about a particular landlord, they can say, you need to take a look at your policies and practices across your whole organisation relating to damp and mould. Please come back to us and tell you how you're doing against all of these things. And all of this adds up to an organisation that I think will have more visibility to residents, and also hopefully reduce the need for their use in the first place, because the ultimate aim is that we have landlords who respect residents and deal with complaints sufficiently fairly and promptly, and we don't then need people to have to use a third party like the Ombudsman. That was a whistle stop tour. I'll stop sharing those slides now, but Luke and I are able to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Luke and William. Also, I just wanted to come to one of the questions that Andy M has posted in the chat, because I think it's a very relevant issue. And I'm going to pose this to our colleagues from the department, and sorry for this, but I think it's a question that is very relevant. And Andy, you're highlighting the issue in Rochdale where a stock transfer has taken place from the local authority to essentially a private registered provider. And in that process, the landlord moves from being one that is required to comply with freedom of information requests, because the local authority is a public body, to one that is not required to respond to freedom of information requests because it is a non-public body. And does government have any plans to level up this inequality that there is between different social landlords, where some are subject to the transparency of the Freedom of Information Act and some aren't?
Yes, thanks, Blaise. I'm not an expert on this, but there are plans in progress to effectively make a parallel system to FOI, which is going to be called the Access to Information Scheme, which the idea being that residents of housing associations will be able to make those requests, and that housing associations will be bound to answer them in the same way that public bodies have to. I think this is going to be managed by the Housing Ombudsman. So perhaps we can come back to people on the exact timings, because I don't have that off the top of my head. But yes, the plan is very much to give people the same rights whether they live in a council-owned house or a housing association one.
Thank you for that, William. I had heard something myself about that, but I thought it was an important question to allow somebody in the department to pick up on. So thank you. Are there any questions or comments then that anybody has for either Luke or William about what government's expecting of landlords, but also what government's doing to affect change? I think that some of you have been posting certain stories and experiences in the chat, and apparently, I think it's apparent that if there was no issue with some landlords, government would not need to be doing things to change things and strengthen powers and strengthen regulation. But again, any questions would be welcome. I'm going to come to Leslie first, actually. Leslie.
Hi, I'm going to turn my video off so that my I'll try and turn it off. Okay, so I guess my question to the department is, what can tenants do now whose landlord is not doing what they should be doing? I know that more teeth is coming and things are coming down the line, but it's like there are a lot of desperate tenants, and what can they do now to kind of navigate this while changes are afoot?
I would say talk to the Ombudsman immediately. They can offer advice and about navigating landlords' complaints procedures. I saw in the chat earlier there were suggestions that some landlords were kind of seeking to use loopholes or to sort of not, do things like not answer phones or not provide proper sort of responses to complaints. If there's evidence that a landlord is not following the complaints procedure in terms of timing or process, the Ombudsman can intervene early, and so it's not a case of people having to kind of wait for months and months and months while their own landlord sort of potentially stonewalls. There are things that you could do. So please do, yeah, you don't have to have been through absolutely every single thing with your own landlord before contacting the Ombudsman for advice.
And I guess my follow-up would be that with kind of regards to that, sometimes that requires, you know, the tenants that are obviously, you know, attending today, but other tenants that might not know what the complaint procedure is. So it's about raising awareness within your communities as well. So, I mean, it's like, you know, if the kind of wording or, you know, gaslighting is kind of being done, there are lots of tenants that might not know what the complaint procedure is. You know, that's the concern, I think.
Can I come in as well on that one? Just another piece of advice is tenants should always consider taking their own action under the Home Fitness for Human Habitation Act. We've got guidance on our website which sort of talks you through how you do that. So I think it's always worth considering that. I'll share the link to that guidance with the organisers of this meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to come to a question that David Ormanby has. David, can you introduce yourself and who your landlord is first, and then fire away with your question, please, or your comment?
I'm not a tenant at the moment. My background is in housing and health. I was wondered if it could be explained the relationship between the Housing Ombudsman and the local authority environmental health department, particularly as Luke mentioned that the local authorities have a duty to deal with category 1 hazards, and that includes damp and mould.
So why don't I start and then Luke joins? I think the two, in theory, work hand in hand. So the Ombudsman, you know, local authority has a responsibility to, you know, tackle real live hazards. And I think if people, you know, if there are things which are like clear and present, you know, significant dangers in people's homes, then if they are housing association residents, then they should contact the local authority. And I think sometimes the Ombudsman will suggest that is the right course of action. The Ombudsman, you know, the Ombudsman services do take some months to work through, and so often they are about looking at whether a landlord, I suppose, how a landlord has dealt with a complaint, and whether that complaint has they've sort of followed their processes and, you know, provided redress to the residents, or kind of, you know, compensation, etc. If that was appropriate. So I think it's useful to look at kind of almost a difference between that kind of sort of more emergency focused approach and a longer term. Has the landlord dealt with my problem properly? Luke, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I don't think I've got anything to add to that. I always like to make the point that housing association tenants should always consider contacting their local authority as well if they are concerned about conditions to their property, because as David said out, they have got this duty to take action. They actually have a power to take action if they identify hazards that aren't at the category 1 level, but if they might consider under their own enforcement policy that it's the right thing to do. So it's always worth contacting your local authority.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to come to John from Barnsley again.
Thank you, Blaise. Talking about complaints, the Ombudsman was pointing out to us all that in the new complaints process, there will be an uplift onto some significant fines for non-compliance. And the regulator, I would presume, is fully backing up that policy from the Ombudsman. One of the things that does have tenants worried is, for instance, there has been an example this week where one local authority has been fined £500,000. That is not a misstatement for a very, very complex case and ignoring a tenant's concerns. Who's going to pay that fine? Out of whose budget will it come? Will it come out of the HRA? Because There we go. There's a few kitchens and bathrooms and a few damp and mould issues resolved, if that's the case. Thank you. It may be above the pay grade of the gentleman of Will and the other gentleman.
So I think it's worth saying the Ombudsman's power to issue fines are about compensation. Is they don't issue fines, they ask landlords to pay compensation to residents, and so that's about trying to understand what is always challenging, I suppose, to try and put in some monetary terms the kind of pain and suffering and inconvenience that someone has caused because their landlord didn't treat them properly. I think the case I've just had a quick Google search for that, and I think that fine was imposed by through the legal system through a judge rather than the ombudsman. Sorry. So, I mean, you're right that though. I mean, landlords themselves often have, I think, reserves for that kinds of thing, and potentially insurance, though I don't know that well. But ultimately, you're right, John, that if there is significant fines to landlords, then they have to find that money from somewhere. And I think but there is a sort of real challenge in terms of trying to get the challenge to landlords right, in terms of trying to make them face consequences for their actions while still ensuring that they are viable and can provide the services that residents need. And what the regulator of social housing is going to be able to do in future is have a much more proactive approach to this, looking more closely not just at the financial health organisations, but at the way in which they treat their residents.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to come
Thank you,
to. Oh, sorry. Somebody coming in there.
I was just saying thank you, Will.
Sorry for cutting across you, John. I'm going to come to Carl next. Carl, could you let us know who you are and where you're from, and then send your question or comment, please?
My name's Carl. I'm on the scrutiny panel for Tower Housing, which is our landlord, which is BCH. My question is basically, in the new housing bill that's coming out in the white paper, what provisions are in there for landlords to what they have to deal with, sort of damp and mold issues, and basically landlords should also sort of communicate with tenants on what they're going to do about the damp and mold issue, like I sort of sending out surveyors and things like that for the damp and mold. That's my question, basically.
Luke, I can say something about Awab's law, but you may know more if you're still there.
Apologies, because sorry, I'm on my phone. It takes a second or two to unmute. Yes. Awab's law is in the social rented sector. We've got potentially two bills in Parliament. Though currently there's a social housing bill in Parliament, and an aspect of that's going to be what's called Awab's law, which is a requirement for landlords to respond within a set time period to complaints, not just about damp and mould, even though it's named after our Bishop, but respond to complaints about conditions within a set time period, and then in another set time period to start works to remedy those complaints. So actually setting out a structure for social landlords there. This already exists to a certain extent in the private rented sector, because private landlords will be given a certain amount of time to do work under the Housing Act 2004 if a local authority was taking legal action, and of course that would also apply to housing associations the local authority took action to. I'm aware that's not a very conclusive answer to your question, but I'm happy to go away and put something together that's a bit more conclusive, because I have a colleague who knows a bit more about this than me, and share it with the organisers of this group.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Luke, and we'll make sure that we circulate that further advice note, not just to people attending today, but more broadly as well. I'm going to just comment on one of the posts that Leslie's put in, which is a comment that I hear quite a bit, and we heard this yesterday in the session that we did in Birmingham from an attendee there, which is that there are a lot of tenants out there that think that if they raise concerns with their landlords or they make complaints that they will be evicted. And I think this is a subject that we need to take away, and that we need to talk to colleagues in the department around further work around raising people's awareness of the rights they have, and their right of recourse and their right to complain. If people feel that, you know, that some punitive act it can be taken against them by their landlord for essentially making a complaint. I mean, I have yet to come across a court that has awarded a possession order to a landlord because their tenant has made a complaint in the social housing sector. But we need to be getting more information out there to residents about this. We need to be breaking down those myths and those barriers, because if these are reasons why people are reticent for coming forward and demanding a better service, we've got to get information, you know, out to people that reinforces to them what their rights are and what the responsibilities of thetheir landlords are. So I just wanted to make a comment on that before moving along. I'm going to take a question from Maz before I move along. So Maz, over to you.
Hi, so I just wanted to comment on that. I'm what you would call an ethnic minority person, just to give you a bit of background. And the thing that I see sorry, I should mention I'm from Bradford. Our housing association is in communities. And the thing that I see is there's a lot of families who don't have access to the internet, so cannot get the information that they need off the websites. Secondly, some don't have this language skills. And I was wondering if there was anything in the new legislation also. It's a question I put up earlier, which was, is there any? My idea is that when a report is given, it doesn't. I tried to help a neighbour and they wouldn't take my report, but she couldn't speak English. So surely there should be some way to say that neighbours can help each other by making the reports. Neighbours who are working together to make reports, particularly if there are issues that affect more than one household within in our case, block of flats or anything like that. Is there something in the new legislation that means that the community, if you like, householders can liaise together with housing associations? And also is the other question that I have, which I mentioned earlier on the chat, was, could we not have it down there that every housing association has to have a time limit for a trained, I call them a trained surveyor, but basically somebody who knows what they're talking about, to literally come out? I mean, I've suggested 7 days to come out and investigate the issue. And my third question, sorry, I've got a few questions here, I'm throwing them all at you, would be that if a housing association has not resolved the issue in a sufficient time, can a person not get it done privately? And then they would then, instead of fining them, they would then have to pay it, literally pay it. So you get it done privately, but then the cost, the payment then has to go to the housing association to get whatever it is revolved, whether it's damp or mould or whatever.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those, Zara. Can I just, thank you for those, Maz. Sorry, the mentioning of Zara's name will become apparent in a moment. Can I pick up on the first one? And actually, Zara has given the answer that I was going to give in the chat, hence me confusing the names, I'm afraid. The housing association will need something signing from your member that says, I authorise you to deal with Maz on my behalf. If they don't have that, they will quote data protection reasons as to why they can't discuss somebody else's personal circumstances with you, but a signed authorization should be sufficient, and Zara's noted that point in the chat also. I wonder with the other 2 points, Will or Luke, could I come to you with those?
Yeah, I've got a couple of points. I mean, you asked about language, and clearly, as you say, there are lots of people living in social housing who don't necessarily speak English in like or able to sort of process like huge technical documents. And we recognise this. I mean, our most recent campaign, I think, had materials in 6 languages, including Polish and Bengali. But I appreciate that not every social landlord will necessarily offer sort of that level of, service. And I think it's clear to me that landlords should be making efforts to reach out to their residents in ways that they can understand, especially where they've got large groups of residents who come from a particular, sort of backgrounds and speak a particular language. And I think the Ombudsman's Complaints Handling Code makes it clear that a landlord should be setting out their things in sort of simple, clear language. It doesn't mention translating to other languages, but I think they're the kinds of things the Ombudsman would want to consider and look at if there's evidence that there are large groups of people in an area who, because of those sort of lack of English skills, aren't getting access to the complaints process they deserve. Sorry, I'm not trying to think what your other question was.
I think I can come in on the other point, which was about trained assessors coming around within a certain amount of time, and that will be wrapped up in our law, which, as I said, will set out a period of time by which your landlord must respond, and we're going to work through the details of what form that response could take. But certainly, we're thinking about what sort of what expertise the person who comes around should have.
Thank you very much. I would also just very quickly note that we're likely to see some broader regulation coming in around professionalism and qualification as well next year. That's something that's coming in through the Social Housing Regulation Bill as an amendment. So that should introduce some broader requirements around the level of professional qualification that people managing your homes and providing services have. So can I thank you all for attending today's session? Can I also particularly thank our 3 speakers, Leslie, Luke and Will, for their wonderful presentations today. I hope you've enjoyed today's session. We will be sending feedback surveys to everyone by email tomorrow. Please can you fill these in, as your comments are really crucial for us in assessing how useful the session was and for shaping the content of future sessions. Our next webinar will be held on Wednesday, the 7th of June, and will focus on antisocial behaviour. If you haven't yet booked into them, we're running training sessions in Leeds and Liverpool next week on exploring your rights and resident engagement. And then in June, we're running training sessions on equality, diversity and inclusion in social housing. All bookings for webinars and training sessions are through our website, www.4millionhomes.org. Can I encourage you to sign up if you haven't already for our newsletter and help to shape the programme by joining our resident sounding board by contacting us at info@4millionhomes.org. Check out our social media platforms and website and tell your friends and neighbours about 4 Million Homes. We want as many residents to get involved in the programme as want to be involved in it. Finally, if you are from a landlord, and I know we had some landlords registered in for the session today, please sign up for our supporters kit at info@4millionhomes.org and tell your residents about the programme, its training and online events. Once again, thank you very much for attending today, and I look forward to seeing you at future 4 Million Homes events. Thank you.